it's almost like someone should have wrote a book about kind of the the rise and fall of the oil and gas industry. So I think you came up with a good name.
Yeah, from miracle to menace. Yeah, I was. It was about it was spring about 2 years ago, and the battles were raging, and the Energy East had just been canceled because of opposition in central Canada. The battle was on. John Horgan had been elected BC, and the battle was on over Trans Mountain. And we were getting all this advice. The Trudeau government had been elected, and we'd lost the Keystone XL pipeline in late 2015 because of Obama. We lost the Northern Gateway because of an election promise because of Justin Trudeau. We lost Energy East due to the complexities. We lost Trans Mountain was war over Trans Mountain, and everyone's saying, "Well, look, Alberta, why don't you just do something else?" And it sort of triggered a nerve in me. Do what else? People don't seem to understand what it is. So the reason I wrote the book, I picked the title from Miracle to Menace because, of course, as you said in your intro, that this really was the miracle fuel that powered the industry. It started with coal, but the second that they discovered that oil was better than coal in the sense oil really got launched by the British Navy when they discovered the density, they could the power of oil as opposed to coal to power their warships. So it became a strategic resource in early last century after it was discovered in the Middle East. But anyway, it was seen as a miracle until recently. And so the point of the book is that people would say, well, people in Alberta really ought to do something else, that perhaps you ought to diversify in renewables. And the point is the main point of the book is Alberta without oil is Manitoba with mountains. I mean, there's nothing here. If you look at the geography of Alberta, we're in the middle of nowhere. We've got 1,000 kilometers to the west, to the Pacific Ocean across the Rockies. There's nothing to the north. I mean, there's nothing but the Arctic. To the east, there's really no major concentration of population until you get to Toronto. And to the south, we share the U.S. border with the smallest and most underpopulated and economically disadvantaged states of the Union. So what are we going to do here? We didn't even get the good dirt. I mean, in the agricultural side, Manitoba, Saskatchewan got way better arable land. We've got this tilt where because we slope downward from the Rockies. So when we discovered Alberta was doing very, very poorly economically until Leduc in 1947, it was a have-not province. And then they discovered oil at Leduc. It was inside North America. Oil was on a roll, and we never looked back. And so Alberta went from really an economic basket case coming out of the Second World War to one of the top producing oil and gas producing jurisdictions in the world. And so when people say you ought to do something else, what I'm finding in the same way that we went through this when we talked about inactive wells, was when you say that we ought to do something else, it would be nice if you know what you're talking about. So this goes back to the things the industry talk about, 10% of the GDP, the largest resource sector by any measure. So when you say that you want to get out of the oil business, you really ought to do something else. What you're talking about is taken to its logical extension. Half the people in Alberta are going to have to leave and go do somewhere else. We can't all come to the West Coast and become whale watch tour operators. And so I figured that I would write this book, Miracle to Menace. I'm not arguing with the climate issue. It's just when you say to Albertans, first of all, there's this myth that we can get off oil tomorrow. All we need is more political will, which is just complete rubbish. There's no evidence of that anywhere. And secondly, the idea that Albertans could do something else, go into renewable energy, is just preposterous. I mean, you cannot export interruptible wind and solar energy anywhere from Alberta, let alone remember, Alberta, we serve markets. We serve the west coast of BC, California, the Gulf Coast of Mexico. We send oil and natural gas all the way to Quebec. We used to send gas to the East Coast. That's been displaced by Marcellus oil. And so Alberta produces 3.9 million barrels of oil every day, and we consume 365,000 in gasoline and diesel fuel. So we have something like 3 million barrels a day of oil plus the gas, and then we sell that to people that seem to need it. because they don't have it. And so that's what I went. Alberta, a carbon story. And that's why I told the story, because what made Alberta what it is carbon, coal, oil, and natural gas. So that was the theme of the book. Miracle to Menace tells the story. And here we are, and living the dream.
Does it sort of walk through like all those things you touched on? Does it walk through the actual history? How much time in it is sort of spent on the history and then modern day? How did you sort of put that together?
There's 3 sections. The book is called the first section of the book is called Carbon Development, and that's how Alberta went from zero to hero. Really, what we had when we started the early discoveries up to the modern era. So the first section on carbon development ends with the numbers, really, the mathematical size of the industry, the jobs, the employment, the GDP. And more importantly, there's a secondary industry in oil that really nobody talks about, and that is the petrochemical industry, the oil service industry. We build oil field service equipment and sell it all over the world. And so, again, the whole point is, here is when you say you don't want to do this anymore, here's the numbers, and here's the history of what you're talking about and how it was developed. The second section I wrote that for my own interest, was called Carbon Politics. And carbon politics is, how did oil go from a miracle fuel to the end of life on Earth as we know it? And so I talked about both the federal politics, the provincial politics, the National Energy Program, when they love it and they hate it, the pipelines and so on. But it really went into the history of climate change, all the problems we have in the world. How did climate change get to the top of the list? I'm a senior citizen. I'm in my mid-60s. When I was a kid, we were worried about a nuclear war. Actually, I used to come home from school and ask my parents if we were going to build a bomb shelter. Like I just do. The world's always had problems. The problems have been peace and hunger and war and medicine, and somehow climate change eclipsed every other problem on the Earth as the number one problem we in the West should solve. How did that come to be? So there's that story. And then the last section is carbon future. And that is, how does it look? And what's very interesting is all the statistical reports indicate, no matter what we're told, that oil and gas has no future. There's no statistical evidence of this based on population growth, economic growth, and GDP. There's no credible forecaster, in the absence of a non-existent technological advancement. There is no evidence that we're going to be using less fossil fuels in 20 years than we are today. The world wants in, and so on. And it's also, so I went through the future carbon, I went through the fossil fuel divestment movement, I went through, there's a whole chapter called All the Good News You've Never Heard. And that is the child mortality rates falling, the education rates increasing, the birth rate declines as countries modernize. There's just a ton of good news out there. But the old saying and the old saw in the news business, I've been a writer for 40 years, they say no news is good news. In fact, good news is no news. Good news doesn't sell. Did you know, for example, 7.7 billion people did not die yesterday? I'm just saying, if anybody cares. And then it ends up with carbon future. And I end the book with saying that Alberta's really good at this. And what we should be doing is we should be the innovators leading the world to more efficient oil and gas production. Of course, that's what we're doing at Winterhawk. I actually put it in the book. What we are is very, very good. And we're a highly regulated jurisdiction. We care about carbon. We care about the environment. We care about safety. Instead of getting out of the oil business, and you've seen this before as we try to fight back, the world needs more Canadian oil. We should become the epicenter for an intelligent, paced carbon transition and become a leader in carbon sequestration, in advanced wellbore abandonment techniques, in advanced processing, and all those things. We can do that. Hydrogen, I'm a big hydrogen fan. I'm a big carbon technology fan, graphenes. We should, if you take the hydrocarbon molecule apart, there's hydrogen and carbon. Well, hydrogen in itself is the cleanest fuel on Earth. Carbon is the building block of life, civilization, graphene, and so you go. You really want to get out of the hydrocarbon business? Okay, if you think this through, you don't. So that's how the book ends. Is the third section is optimistic. We're going to be in the fuel business for a long time. and we should be supported, not victimized.